looking at their data, they are still clearly indicating that center of circulation where the hurricane center is saying that it is. I bring that up because this is still a fairly sloppy system. It's kind of almost elongated with almost several little swirls showing up. So the one that the hurricane hunters are investigating is the center that is being depicted by the National Hurricane Center, but it's possible that we may see a new center try and form only because we have currently some fairly decent wind shear on the western side of the storm. That's kind of keeping it a little bit more, as I mentioned, elongated and rather sloppy. So it is not a rapidly intensifying system at this time, so it's still fairly unorganized. And because it is still fairly unorganized, there is still a high likelihood that we may see some shifts in the computer models. In fact, the new track from the National Hurricane Center has kind of shifted fairly dramatically. We'll talk about that in just a second. But as I mentioned, it is still a depression with winds of 35 miles an hour, motion toward the northwest at 14 miles an hour. We would like to see it moving as fast as possible. Now again, where the hurricane hunters are currently is where the hurricane center is saying that the center of the storm is. However, do you see any real thunderstorm development around that center? No, there almost looked like there was a little bit of a rotation north closer to Cuba, and that is also where we're starting to see some thunderstorm development firing up. But you also watch on the satellite here as all of the clouds are kind of quickly moving up toward the north. And that's that wind shear that is keeping this fairly elongated, not a very well-defined center of circulation, and also preventing those thunderstorms from completely wrapping around said center. Again, if that's the center, maybe it's a little bit more north. So the computer models right now are basing the model or basing the center of the storm here. If that shifts later on, maybe later tonight, we start to see more convection, thunderstorms developing around a new center, and perhaps that wind shear kind of forces a new center to try and develop farther north. That would also dramatically change the computer model. So here is the new track. As we go through past Cuba, we have a tropical storm moving into the Gulf of Mexico late Friday, early Saturday, and then kind of quickly ramping up to a hurricane and then becoming possibly again, this is just the preliminary data coming in from the National Hurricane Center from the models and whatnot, as a Category 2. There are still some models indicating that this could be a Category 3, and I'll explain why in a moment, at landfall. But notice, as I said, there was kind of a dramatic shift, not away from Louisiana, not that dramatic, but this is the reason why I like showing the center line, because though I don't want you to just focus solely on that as where the storm is going to go. Remember, it could go anywhere within the cone, which basically at this time encompasses the entire state of Louisiana. But I kind of like to use it as almost a guideline, or kind of a guiding mark. Earlier, it was right over Vermilion Bay. Now it has kind of shifted rather dramatically off to the east. It is possible that if that center maybe gets adjusted a little bit more to the north, we could see this whole track start moving farther and farther to the east. Again, this is not written in stone by any means. We are, yes, at a depression, but for all intents and purposes, this is still a very unorganized depression. It's almost like when it was still an invest, maybe a little bit more organization with that closed circulation, which even that is kind of a loose term, just looking at the data from the hurricane hunters. So this is still a fairly unorganized system, and thus the computer models are going to struggle with its future. So the forecast track, and again, these are the suite this is the computer model suite that the hurricane hunter, or the hurricane center, excuse me, uses to forecast and kind of develop their track. This is still kind of that bullseye location in south central Louisiana that we have seen really since going back to last night. Is this going to change? Very possible, especially if we do see a new center form. So that's kind of what we're rooting on right now. Not that we wish this upon anyone, but if we do see perhaps a new center form, then perhaps these models also shift a little bit more to the east. Here's what's going on right now with the storm. The upper low that is actually helping to increase our rain chances here today is why we had a wetter day and why we're going to have a wetter day tomorrow. That's actually kind of gotten deep into the Caribbean. That's providing that strong wind shear that you see on the western side of the storm. So at the moment, it's kind of helping to rip the storm apart, or at least if nothing else, keep it fairly weak. That is going to change, however, as we go through the forecast. Notice that wind shear in the brighter reds and yellows. that starts to go away, and we start to see kind of weak wind shear as it moves into the central Gulf and certainly toward the northern Gulf of Mexico. Not only is the wind shear going to be fairly light, it is going to be moving over some very deep, very warm water. This is the loop current. You may kind of remember that from Katrina. Now, that does not guarantee, this does not guarantee that a storm is just going to explode in strength. You can go back just a couple of weeks when Grace moved toward Mexico. If you remember Grace, it moved over this incredibly deep, warm water and didn't do anything. And then it moved into actually less conducive water in the Bay of Campeche, and that's where it exploded in strength. So just showing sea surface temperatures can be misleading because storms are always going to move over very warm water. That doesn't necessarily mean they're just going to explode in strength. This is where they gain their energy from, but there's a lot that has to happen in the mid and upper parts of the atmosphere, so that will also help to make the storm explode in strength. So just because it moves over the loop current does not mean it'll explode. Yes, we saw that back in 2005 with Katrina. That's kind of when everyone was talking more about the loop current. Fast forward a few years, Hurricane Gustav moved over the loop current, didn't do anything. So this, again, doesn't mean a whole lot. What I'm showing you, though, is that it will be moving over very deep, warm water, and it appears as though the upper atmosphere over the Gulf of Mexico will be more conducive for potentially, doesn't guarantee it, for potentially a rapidly intensifying hurricane. Rapidly intensifying hurricanes are nearly impossible to forecast. All we can do is show you that the ingredients are right and that is a potential. And really, at this moment, we're not taking any option off the table of what Ida may eventually do, which again, it is not Ida right now. Big ridge of high pressure still fairly dominant across much of the southern United States and out in the Atlantic. It's going to be this anchored position in the Atlantic that we're going to watch very closely. What the models had been indicating is that it would stay parked right over North Carolina, which if that is the case, that would probably not be bad for us, because if it were to follow more the outer periphery of this high, it may be more inclined to turn farther to our east. What the models have been hinting at is that that high will build inland a bit and kind of keep pushing the storm a little bit closer to southeast Louisiana. Well, what if that high doesn't build further inland in the United States and it stays parked over coastal North Carolina or maybe even out offshore? That would certainly allow the storm to turn much sooner and be moving more a little bit to our east. So that is still very much a possibility and something we'll be watching over the next couple of days. Now, as far as the forecast as it stands now, that's kind of what we have to base all of our decisions on. So as we get towards Saturday night, the risk of tropical storm force winds begins to increase. So you still have tomorrow, you still have Saturday to do anything that you need to prepare. And again, this may not be a storm that everyone has to leave for. It may be that low-lying areas certainly outside of the levee protection system, but inland and certainly farther north, it may not be something that we have to leave for. But this is the next couple of days that you have to prepare your home as we get towards Saturday night, and then certainly on into Sunday. The probability of those tropical storm to then hurricane force winds greatly increases. Obviously, the strongest of the winds are going to be right near the center of circulation. But even at this track, which is trended closer to New Orleans, it does put us on what we call the dirty side. It's the wetter side. It's where the strongest winds are and where you're going to get that strong onshore flow, which is going to create a storm surge. The only positive for us is that it really is not going to be over the Gulf waters for very long. As I mentioned, moving into the Gulf by Saturday, by Monday night, it should already be inland. So you've got Saturday, Sunday, and most of the day on Monday. So you do have 3 days, but it's not going to just sit over the Gulf, and that's what we're hoping on. Rainfall, we are going to see a surge of deep tropical moisture. That's that more heavy rain, and that is certainly going to be a threat to us as we get towards Saturday night, more so Sunday, and definitely hanging on into Monday. Rainfall totals, again, these are very rough estimates right now because there just is so much unknown, but at the moment, models are going with kind of a wide swath of about 7+ inches of rainfall, and then maybe some pockets right along the coastline of about 10 to 15. So at the moment, kind of looking at these colors, and I know sometimes they get a little bit more confusing, it looks like kind of a 7 to 10 widespread. That's going to cause some flooding with higher amounts possible. And again, that is a very, very rough estimate at this point, and something that we're going to be able to analyze a little bit more as we get closer to the actual event. But as I mentioned yesterday, we don't have a whole lot of lead time. Again, we now have a name storm with a track, and we're looking at a landfall potentially on Monday nights. We're here Thursday, you've got tomorrow, Saturday, and then by Sunday we'll start to see the weather worsen, and then by Monday night a landfall. And at that point, Monday during the day, you want to be indoors or gone if you need to, and just wait it out. And this is hopefully something that we'll be able to just wait out very quickly, as it does look like the storm is eventually going to get picked up by an upper trough and move away. The models, as I mentioned, I've been kind of digging into a lot of the different tropical models. There isn't at the moment a single one that is not indicating a landfall in southeast, or I should say southern Louisiana, whether that be south central or southeast Louisiana. This is the Euro at 11 o'clock on Sunday, right off the coast or just along the shoreline, and then the GFS has the storm already inland. So these models actually have more of a Sunday night going into Monday. So the timing could change. If anything, that may not be bad for us. Again, less time over the Gulf water, so something we will be watching closely. So what do you need to know right now? The potential impacts will likely start as soon as early Sunday. Rapid intensification is possible. As I mentioned, that is almost nearly impossible to forecast. You may see some models kind of trending that way, and really the best we can do is say that the ingredients are there, and that is certainly a possibility, but not a guarantee. However, if it was me, I would always prepare for the worst, and the worst could be a major hurricane at landfall. The environment over the Gulf is favorable. As I mentioned, you have the deep warm water. You're not going to have a whole lot of wind shear, so that would allow for a rapidly intensifying storm. Just because all the ingredients are there, kind of like tornado watches or severe thunderstorm watches, all the ingredients are there. Does it always happen? No, it doesn't always happen. But better to be safe than sorry and prepare for that eventuality. The forecast, as I mentioned, is not written in stone, because this is still a very weak and unorganized storm. If you had a more defined center of circulation and you had a more structurally sound storm, then the computer models would probably do a far more accurate forecast. With that said, they have been indicating southeast or south central Louisiana since last night, and they have trended the same today. Will that trend continue once we get the new model runs in later tonight at 10 o'clock? That's yet to be seen. We will see. Perhaps a new center tries to form and all of the models start shifting even farther to the east. Again, we don't wish this on anyone, but that would certainly be great news for us. So those are all the unknowns. And I know that gets very, very frustrating for folks, because this is that more edge of your seat. I think a lot of folks do better when you know for certain that a major hurricane is coming. But at this point, we really just cannot say that for certain. That's the way things are setting up at the moment, and something that we need to be prepared for. But again, as far as I guess I'm just always the optimist, and always trying to judge every potential eventuality of what could or could not happen. And there are things that still could happen with this storm. The way the models have been trending, South Louisiana, the way the models have been trending, a strong hurricane, certainly a Category 2, possibly even a major Category 3 hurricane. It could even be stronger than that. As I'd mentioned, I was at my son's school this morning. A lot of parents were coming up to me and teachers asking me everything. I said, to be honest, every option right now is on the table with this, only because we are still very much with Depression 9 in the formative, what we call Genesis phase, where it is starting to develop. It's still not much better defined than it was when it was just an invest. So in other words, just a tropical wave, a big group of thunderstorms that were still fairly unorganized. So with that said, the computer models still can change. Yes, it's a little more disheartening to see that they kind of grabbed onto South Louisiana last night. If you were with me at the 5 and 6 last night, it was all Houston and Texas. Then at 10, they all shifted to Louisiana, and they've stayed there since yesterday. Well, maybe if this gets a little bit better organized, we may see a shift. We still may. It's also possible that they don't shift and the models are kind of locked on us, and that is where the storm will eventually end up. So just prepare right now for a landfalling, possibly major hurricane as we get into the end of the weekend and start of next week. Here again is the visible satellite. You can kind of see what looks to be a broad circulation right here, almost just to the south of the Cayman Islands or west of Jamaica. But then as I'm looking at the satellite as well, you almost see what looks to be a little circulation up north of the Caymans, a little closer to Cuba. And what we've also seen many, many times with these sheared storms, that it's almost kind of an elongated, really it's almost more of what we call an inverted trough. You almost have just a broad troughing right here, kind of across from south of Cuba, across the Caymans, and even deeper into the Caribbean. So this is almost more of a broad trough, that a little part of which was able to close off and get that low-level closed circulation, which then by definition does make it a depression. But it's struggling. Even with the hurricane hunters were finding, were not exactly very strong winds near that center. They were a little bit more outside of it. And again, they're only going to focus on this center. They're not, usually if they don't have the kind of, depending upon their mission, they may go and investigate other little areas of circulation, and it'd be interesting to see if they do fly northward toward Cuba and kind of investigate the northern part of this, almost what looks to be more of a broad trough, because as I colorize it, here is that center. And again, it's almost more of a broad center. There is certainly no thunderstorm development near that center. More thunderstorms over here, a little bit to the deeper cloud heights, taller cloud heights, a little bit closer to southern Cuba. So is that going to be the center of the storm throughout the duration? Don't know. We don't know. It may be a little bit more north. It could be. It could be that this is, again, a very well forecasted storm, and the models really don't change all that much, and the outer environment, the inner workings of the hurricane are well forecasted by the models. And this ends up being yet another very well forecasted storm. As I've said many times, just in the last couple of years, and just looking at hurricanes going back to even before Katrina, the models have been doing a phenomenal job really in the last 2 to 3 years. Just in the last couple of years, we can put a little bit more comfort, if you will, for what the models say, even in the long term. There was a point when these forecasts first came out, there was kind of a mindset of you want to be in the cone or directly in the center of that line at the 5-day forecast because you know it's not going to go there. Well, we've kind of gotten to a point where now those forecasts are pretty accurate, and we don't really see them change all that much. And that has certainly been the trend for a lot of our storms. That doesn't mean it's going to be the trend for every single storm. There are still a lot of unknowns and so many variables that even computer models cannot forecast accurately, just because of how much data has to go into them. But the way the computer models have been in the last several years, they usually don't change all that much. However, with that said, from all the way to the Louisiana-Texas coast to even almost Alabama is still well within the margin of error. And with that said, there is still kind of a 30% chance that a storm does not fall within the cone. So the cone is estimating that most of the forecast would fall within this margin of error, but the margin of error actually exceeds the cone itself on both the east and west side. So still, folks in Texas are not out of the woods yet. Alabama and Florida, not out of the woods yet. It does look like the models are kind of narrowing in on southeast Louisiana, but certainly not written in stone. I was kind of talking about the timing, and I may have said at one point Monday night. I mistakenly said that should have been Sunday night. It looks like this will be moving inland and then hopefully moving northward fairly quickly. It's a little bit different than what the GFS is saying. The GFS has been a little bit slower, but based on the official forecast from the Hurricane Center, we are looking at kind of a Sunday afternoon that this could be reaching near the mouth of the river or coastal Louisiana and then quickly moving northward. I apologize if I may have said that. Sometimes there's just so much information to get to. I get myself confused, but this is what we're looking at right now. And again, the forecast intensity is the least accurate of all the forecast variables that the Hurricane Center provides. The track, far more accurate than the intensity. And I say that only because there are some models that do make this a major hurricane up to and before landfall. So it may be that sometime Saturday into Sunday, we may be looking at a major hurricane moving toward the coast of Louisiana. That is still very much a possibility. A lot of factors go into these forecasts, and I know we're still more in that early unknown phase that a lot of folks would rather just know yes or no, is it coming here? How bad is it going to be? I say based on what we see right now, it is coming here and it could be a major hurricane. Is that what you need to hear just to kind of get those plans ready to go? Then I'll say it. I would plan on a landfalling hurricane with New Orleans and southeast Louisiana unfortunately falling on the worst side of the storm. We do have that model consensus right now. Could it shift? Yes. Based on the thinking right now and just what we're seeing at the moment, we're going to go with this. It could change, may not, but let's go with this at the moment and just prepare for what could be a major hurricane making its way towards southeast Louisiana as we get toward the end of the weekend. As I mentioned, I'm always that optimist, trying to find that more positive. Let me jump back here. And let me jump back here and go through the timing of this. Again, as we look at the forecast, if it keeps that that speed at 14 miles an hour, that would be great for us. We want to see this move in and out as fast as possible. It's also going to be interesting to see what happens as it moves over Cuba, as again, it still may fall more on the eastern side of that track and have a little bit more lane interaction. Now, unfortunately, this part of Cuba is flat. There are no mountains like we have seen as the storms move over Hispaniola and eastern Cuba. This is flat, doesn't really do a whole lot to the circulation, but it may not really intensify rapidly until we see it get into the Gulf of Mexico. But as I mentioned, it's getting into the Gulf Saturday. And then here we go into Saturday afternoon, Sunday already making landfall, by Monday moving north and improving conditions, because if it's able to take a turn more toward the northeast, being picked up by an upper trough, that would start moving in a direction that would begin pushing any water that has built up along our coast and pushing it farther offshore. So that is, again, any kind of positive news would be that the storm is likely to make a little bit more of a turn and start allowing for more of a northwesterly wind, which would then start to push that water away. And we should begin to see improving conditions as soon as Monday night or into certainly Tuesday and for the rest of next week. Again, we're not quite yet to the peak of hurricane season. That doesn't come until September 10th. So hopefully this is the only scare aside from Claudette. Remember Claudette early in the season? Hopefully this is the only other one that we have to deal with. It'll be one that we watch very, very closely. Yes, we have seen a little bit more model consensus with the spaghetti plot. This is the suite of models that the Hurricane Center uses to build their forecast track. And so if these shift, and we'll usually kind of get almost a heads up, these models will run and be issued before we get a new track from the National Hurricane Center. So we'll probably see this come out before 10 tonight, and we'll see. Does it make another jump east, or does it stay where it is? We'll wait to see. But if it does make another shift to the east, we would likely by, again, 10 o'clock will be the new track from the Hurricane Center. We would likely see this entire track be shifted. Again, it's right now in the earlier stages of development, so there may not be too many other dramatic changes unless we see a new center try and form before it moves into the Gulf of Mexico, which we still have rest of the night tonight and most of the day, almost all day tomorrow, Friday, before it does enter the Gulf of Mexico by Saturday. But as I mentioned, in terms of getting ready for it, you've got today, you've got tomorrow. It's going to be a wetter day tomorrow, but then you also have Saturday before things start going down on Sunday throughout the day. Right now it's battling wind shear. Unfortunately, that wind shear is not going to be there forever, so it is going to be moving into a more hospitable environment once in the Gulf as far as any further development and organization goes. Again, the ingredients are there for this to be a rapidly intensifying hurricane. That does not necessarily mean that it will. I don't want to worry folks. I don't want to put folks on edge, so I'm trying to answer as many questions as I can. There is still, at the moment, more questions and answers until the storm is able to organize more so, and we may not see that until maybe at 10, but certainly as we get into the day Friday and Saturday, as this upper trough kind of pulls away, it'll lose that wind shear, and then we should finally see a little bit more strengthening of the storm, and we're expecting that to happen throughout the course of the weekend. So we're going to wrap things up right now as we continue to monitor what will likely become Ida. Again, if you're just joining us, it is still Tropical Depression number 9. It is not yet a tropical storm, and at the moment with wind shear, it's almost kind of keeping the storm rather elongated as opposed to becoming more of a compact symmetrical storm. So at the moment, it's struggling, but that will not continue through the duration of the storm, and it's something that we're going to have to watch very closely, as since last night, the models have been bullseyeing and targeting southeast or south central Louisiana, either of which would put New Orleans and our viewing area under the worst part of the storm by Sunday, possibly afternoon going into Sunday night. And it's something that we'll need to be prepared for. Again, you don't have too many days to prepare for. This 5-day forecast, once it was issued, we're already looking at a day 3 landfall. So we don't have as much lead time with this one as we would normally like. Hopefully that also means this will move fairly quickly through the Gulf of Mexico, and it won't have as much time to rapidly strengthen over those warm Gulf waters. But we will see. It'll be something we watch for very closely. We'll have another update coming up on Eyewitness News at 5 and 6. And as I mentioned, we'll get new coordinates. Actually, I should say we'll get new coordinates at 7. So we'll do a little brief update on that. And then a new track will be issued at 10 p.m. If you're just joining us again, that new track has shifted a little bit more to the east to where we have seen now more southeast Louisiana under possibly the landfall of the storm. But we will see you back here on Eyewitness News at 5. For now, I'm Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin.
From Channel 4's Eyewitness News, this has been your local weather expert alert.